I think we're going back to the 1920s. Now before we get into the sketching part, just make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you get notified when new videos are uploaded every single week. Alright, so before we get started with the Photoshop magic and the digital sketching, I want to just throw down some print paper and pick up the big pen and doodle what it is I'm going to sketch. This way I get a better understanding of especially the proportions of the car that I'm sketching, or if it's a product or whatever it is. Just putting it down on paper like this and blocking out the main elements or the main volumes of the product really helps with understanding how you can take this and make it into a modern version of it. Because if you have the same kind of volumes, you can tweak those. You can kind of design the volumes instead of designing the whole car as a brand new car. But if you take the old volumes and the old proportions and modernize those, add some chamfers and add some new corners and angles to them, you're still gonna have this resemblance of the original product, in this case obviously a Ford Model T. So I just picked up the big pen here and put down a 10-minute sketch using one single marker. This is an alcohol-based marker. It's not on marker paper. I prefer print paper because it has more of a friction to it, and it's not like sketching on ice, which I think it's what it feels like sometimes when you sketch on marker paper. Everything just slides over all over the place. But this is pretty much all you need to get started, and especially if you haven't sketched in a long time, it feels really good to pick up the pen and use some old traditional tools, and obviously 1 or 2 or maybe 3 cups of coffee to just get started. Not over 3 though, otherwise your hand is gonna get all jittery, and you need to keep your hand stable when you're sketching, obviously. I prefer a more sketchy, messy end result instead of an illustration, and that's what I'm going for in this sketch as well. So if you're only using a few tools like I'm doing right here, one important thing to get some weight and depth to your sketches is to obviously add line weight. And line weight is all dependent on where your light source is, and that's pretty much all you need to get a really cool sketch or doodle like this. So once I'm happy with this sketch and the proportions of this doodle, I'm going to jump into Photoshop and take what I learned from this sketch and implement it in a modern way. Alright, so we're in Photoshop right now. First of all, we want to take what we learned from the analog sketch and kind of implement it here in Photoshop with the proportions and with the main volumes and elements that we had. And to me, this Model T is built up of 2 main volumes, or main boxes, if you want to call it that. And I teach this in my courses. If you've been through my courses, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I like to box my products up using simple geometries, and that's why I put out these red lines to start with. That will help me guide what I need to do and what I need to fill in. And as we go, this is going to be more and more defined. It's kind of like we're starting with a blurry vision of what we want, and once we get the proportions down and the shading down and the main features and graphic design, then when we have that down, that's the point when we can jump in and get into details. And the background is going to slowly disappear, and it's going to be more rendered as we go along because we're adding more and more layers on top of this sketch. And I think this sketch in particular had about, I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly, but probably around 50 to 60 layers. And when you're creating a new layer, that all depends on how so layering in Photoshop is like, this is how I think when I'm layering in Photoshop. If I get to a point where I'm happy with where I'm at right now at the sketch, so let's say I have the basic shading down here and I'm happy with it. What I'm gonna do now is to create a new layer, because everything that's underneath this layer I'm fine with. I don't need to change it. So when you come to these points throughout the sketch, just create a new layer, and once you're happy with the next layer that you put in the new layer, just create a new one, and then a new one, and on top of that a new one. So you can always go back if you want to. If there is some feature that you think is not looking good or you want to change it, then you can always, of course, name your layers if you want to do that. I just don't have the patience to do it. I kind of go through and just turn them on and off to see what is in each layer if I have to go back and change something. But obviously the easiest way would be to name all your layers so you know exactly what goes in them if you need to go back and change something. The Model T is kind of an interesting redesign or modernization. It's very simple. The design itself is very simple. There's not a lot of styling features going on. So I wanted to keep this as simple as possible, but at the same time, have a look at the key lines on the original Model T and emphasize those even more and kind of have all the pieces from the 24 Model T work better together so that it doesn't look like all the pieces were manufactured separately. And that all comes down to manufacturing methods. I mean, if we go back 100 years, they produced cars in a very different way that we do today. And that is obviously going to show in the design of the cars. So I kind of had two ways I could take this redesign. One is to just go crazy and do something completely different from the original, or the other way to redesign this is to do what I'm doing right now, is to take the key lines and just modernize every single piece of it, especially the wrap around window. I think that's a really cool feature on this redesign. Even though the original obviously have A, B, and C pillars, I think if we could have something like this, and then we can have the pillars be disguised behind the glass. It doesn't have to be glass, it can be something else, just to have that visual wrap around, like as if it's one piece of glass, it just wraps around the top like this. Talking about the wheels, I didn't want to have some ridiculous 28-inch rims on this car. I obviously wanted to keep it classy and kind of subtle and simple design, because go back again to 1924, they didn't have a lot of complex shapes in their rims. They pretty much had just a bunch of spokes. So I found these cool wheels. I think they suit this car perfectly, and also the chrome ring around it adds to the vintage feel of the overall redesign or modernization of this car. They might not have had a lot of chrome in the 20s, but 30s, 40s, and 50s it started to be extremely common to have a crap ton of chrome on your car, so I kind of want to implement that in this redesign as well. At this point, all the main features are there. Now I just need to add all the details, and this is what's going to make this car come alive and look like a proper car. Because if you don't add these details, it's just going to look like a bunch of airbrush blobs everywhere. So I want to fix the grille, I want to add some shine to that, and also go over every single line that we have and every edge, and add a highlight or a burn point to those edges. Depends, of course, if you have a glossy car, then you need more of those burn points, or if you have a matte car, then you don't need them at all, pretty much. I also wanted to visualize the transparency of the glass, so I added this rectangle within it so that it looks like you're looking through it and you're looking through the far side of the window on the other side. Now, the original 1924 Ford Model T had this hat, or like a sun visor. I don't know what to call it. I'm gonna call it the sun visor. I didn't want to make it exactly like that, but I wanted to still have some resemblance to something like that. So that's why I added that chamfer up above the windscreen. The front headlights are obviously glass, so that means that they are going to reflect a lot of things that are around the car or in the environment of the car. And you don't have to do, you don't have to go in and paint trees or whatever in these headlights, but what you do want to do is just add a bunch of hard reflections in the headlights to make it look like it's actually glass. And what you can do to add depth, so if you have, for example, if you make a reflection in the glass, you can duplicate that and just move it a little bit. That will give it the thickness of the glass itself. Well, alright, so there we have it. That's the Ford Model T 1924 modernization. I had a lot of fun with this. It's a kind of a unique modernization. I don't think I've gone this far back to the 20s and make a redesign. So this was a challenge for sure, because the changes that we had to make were so substantial, but at the same time, you want to keep it Ford Model T proportions and volumes. I really hope you enjoyed this video just as much as I enjoyed making it, and keep the suggestions on redesigns coming in the comments below. It's kind of the more likes a car get, the more tempted I am to try and redesign that car, and that was exactly what happened with this Ford Model T. What I'm gonna do now, as always, is show you the before and after. Even though there's a huge difference between the before and after in this one, it's still fun to see the original and kind of compare it to the redesign and see the key lines and how that worked out. So I'm gonna do that right now. If you like what you see, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna link my playlist up in the corner, up in that corner right there, with all the redesigns that we've done so far. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you in the next video, and have a fantastic day.